E os currículos,
Sorry,
hein?
I started.
Okay,
We are online.
You just open here. All right. So good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. We are starting another panel of our seminar, Third International Conference on Competition and Innovation. And I'm delighted to share this panel with three amazing professionals. I will start to present to you Professor Barak Orbach from the University of Arizona. Professor Barak has an extensive resume. I will try to summarize it if I can. He has many academic appointments, University of Arizona, James E. Rogers College of Law, Professor of Law, Associate Professor of Law, tenured in 2009, Founding Director, the Business Law Program, Affiliate Faculty, the Institute for LGBT Studies, Faculty Advisor, Arizona Law Review, and etc. We are delighted to have you here, Professor Barak. We have also Commissioner Lenisa. Let me just find the resume of Commissioner Lenisa. Lenisa is commissioned at CADE. She's professor of postgraduate programs in tax law at IDP. And we also have Professor Vinicius Klein and myself, members of IBCI. Then we can start. Thank you very much for being here. And Professor Barak, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So let me just share my screen. Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a thrill to be with you guys. I always like to get to outside the United States and learn about how things are done elsewhere. I was born and raised in Israel, so I have some experience in moving across countries, and I know how much difference it makes. So I will try to be, if I say something that really doesn't make any sense for Brazil, you should let me know. Lenisa and I talked a few weeks ago, and I think that we're going to talk about very similar things, just a different perspective, and I look forward to this conversation. So I call this presentation With You, Not Near You, which, as you know, the traditional advertising for movies is coming soon to the theater near you. And that's not going to be anywhere in the coming future. So I will try to talk about the decline of movie exhibition and place it in the context of the changes in the economy and how competition policy is going to move forward. And most importantly, I'll try to explain why you should care about that as individuals. So the general context of what do movies can teach us about competition policy, I would say that there are a few things that are kind of quite fundamental that are very helpful. First of all, content delivery is one of the most symbolic elements of technological change. So when we see innovation, technological change, and competition policy, typically it begins with elements of content. So it began in the 19th century with the ability to transfer voice, have voice recording, and then have a video. And right now we see that once again, that the information technologies, they drive forward, the content technology, they drive forward the technological change that has impact on all of us in every dimension of life and creates many issues for competition policy. The other element is that the market arrangements, that is what type of agreements, how do companies conceptualize agreements, we can learn them from watching the industries that evolve first. So when I say the motion picture industry, you should think these are the predecessors of the present digital platform. So the rise would be similar to the rise of the present digital platform, and the decline would inevitably come because of the rise of the replacements. The next thing is market structure. Now, market structure is an important thing because it is such an inherent element of competition policy. And as I will hope that I would be able to persuade you, one of the things that we are going to see is that market structure is going to be less relevant, or the ability to engage in structured analysis of markets will not be so much available. And this is something that will have impact on competition policy. And the fastest we'll be able to develop tools, the better we'll be able to actually maintain competition and competition law enforcement. And the last thing, which is the symbol is market disruption. So every new technology creates some disruption. We used to celebrate it. Now we have a better understanding that market disruption comes at a high cost. What we have now is the collision of disasters. So on the one hand, we have technological disruptions that have been going on for 2 or 3 decades. And now we have COVID that put the disruption on steroids and move everything much faster. And there's nothing, while we really celebrate technological innovation, one of the problems is that they are the change are costly, and in democracies, frustrated people still have the right to vote. So this creates many problems that we should do better than what we have done so far. So let's begin with where we are now, which could be called the Great Slump. How bad things have been happening for the motion picture industry. So you could see the slide, which shows that basically since 2003, the motion picture movie exhibition has been on the decline. And so, it was really bad for the motion picture industry, moving from $16 billion a year to about $13 billion a year. Percentage-wise, it's awful. This was from 95 to 2019. Now, see what happened in this year. What we have in this year is 80% decline. This is a disaster. No recovery. The recovery will be a blip. So this is the great slump, which is basically symbolic to the decline or demise of brick-and-mortar retailers. Just about the present year, these are the first 11 weeks of 2020. So as you could see, the movie industry until March did more or less every week produced close to $70 million or more every week. And the number of movies were 75 movies a week or more. That's the first 11 weeks. The subsequent 37 weeks were miserable. So first of all, you could see the revenues. The biggest weekend was the biggest weekend week was $30 million. So the decline was massive. And that week, of course, was the Labor Week, the Labor Day week in the United States, which the United States has been paying dearly for that because so many people went out, and now we have the toll rate here is devastating. So this is the present and probably the future of movie exhibition. So what's the meaning of this decline? Number one, which is important to understand, movie theaters are basically brick-and-mortar retailers of motion picture industry. So they're basically a reflection of all the ordinary brick-and-mortar retailers. What they have been thought or they had fantasies about is that they are different in some way. This is always true. We always think that we are different when we think that bad things are about to happen to us. And to be fair with myself, education is the same thing. Schools are the brick-and-mortar retailers of education. And as a professor, I can tell you, universities always think that they are special and nothing bad will happen to them. So any educator who want to think about how he can do better, he should look at movie theaters and see this is his future. The next thing is that, well, just as I mentioned, the 21st century has been really unpleasant for brick and mortar. It has been persistently declining. So again, just a reflection, nothing new here. And the last thing, as I said at the beginning, the COVID is just accelerated the process. So in many ways, all we see now is mostly acceleration of things that we saw them coming. So just in context, just a little bit more data. This is box office revenues in the United States since 1929, more or less when sound movies were released. So you could see there were booms and busts. And the last bust began a very slow decline, beginning in 2003. And the motion picture industry had fantasies that they would be able to use big data and AI to generate moviegoers. That's nice. But as we see this, even though it's a moderate decline, the collapse is inevitable. Okay? So one thing of the collapse, you could see that the utilization of screens, that is how many screens we have, how many people per screen how many people watch a movie in a screen, and what's the revenues. And what you can see here is that this has been on a persistent decline. That is, every year since the advent of TV, we have the motion picture industry makes less money per screen, and there are fewer people per screen. So this is why we have megaplexes, and I'm sure that in Brazil you have them as well. You have more and more screens, and they are emptier and emptier every year. Okay, so again, this brings us to the present collapse. So one thing about it, which is a general question, why some industries decline faster than others? Okay, so we saw that the bookstores started crashing really fast once Amazon and Barnes & Noble opened their store. Other industries, such as movie theaters or educations, have declined in a more slowly fashion. So the question is why? And one thing, and this is the traditional antitrust analysis, we think that the changes happen once we have quality of substitutes. That is, people may change from one product to another when the substitute is available and it's high quality substitute. And that's kind of the traditional analysis. But there's a different element or an additional element for certain institutions, such as movie theaters, such as sports, such as education. And this is the hedonic value. That is, people do things because of value that is not utilitarian, just because we enjoy that, okay? So each one of you, I hope that you've had many vacations in your life and that you have many vacations in your horizon. Whenever you go to vacation, probably you don't go by yourself. And if you go to by yourself, you will have all your insecurities surface. I mean, why am I alone? Now, if you go to vacation with another person or a group of people, very often you don't go to your first choice. You make compromises about the location. And the reason is that you have this kind of hedonic value, the value from other things, doing things with other, which for antitrust, it's a challenge. The implicit assumption in antitrust is that value is utilitarian. We do things because they serve us. That is kind of how we measure surplus or welfare. We have some kind of monetary value. In reality, this is not how people make choices. To make it clear for you why it affects so important for you, think about all the things that you spend money on, and before you spend, while you spend, and after, you know that you should not have done that. You know, buying ice cream, buying cakes, going to stupid movies, buying anything. Okay, so very often we do things that do not have utilitarian explanation, but rather it's our psychic, that our psychic give us some gratification. Now, this can be presented as utility, but it's not exactly that from the economic perspective. So for this reason, I would like to talk a little bit about the difference between shared consumption and shared utilization, which a kind of shared utilization would do that we do things for the value, and shared consumption is because of the hedonic value. So very often, it's very, very common that we shared resources or multiple parties share a resource. Okay, this is a common phenomenon. So let's talk about the shared utilizations. So as you could know, we share offices, we work in the same place, we use public transportation, we use office equipment, one photocopier, one stapler, and of course, we all share bathrooms very often, okay? Now, there are reasons for that, and the reasons is that it's efficient just in terms of utilizing an asset more. If a physical asset is not in use, it's less efficient than if it's used more. So this is one reason we do that. The other reason we do that is collaborative activities. The way we have grown up was that to collaborate with other people, we should be in the same space, okay? Since we are doing this conference online, we know that we find alternatives. And the last thing is indirect network effect. And this would be that, you bring one pool of market to one side, that is consumers, it will be more valuable to the other side of the market, such as sellers. So this is why we have malls, department stores, and schools. Okay? Let's talk about shared consumption. So first of all, it is a form of direct network externalities. That is, there are things that feel good for us when we do them with other people. Okay, and it's the one thing it's feel good. The other thing is that we learn from other people. So there is some value in that. All leisure activities are about that. Most leisure activities, our species, which is a social species, we like to do it with other people. So going to the movies, going to restaurants, going to sport events, shopping. And, I didn't write it, but most people to date, they use at least another person. It's very difficult to date by yourself. So as a species, we like to do things with other people. Okay? In reality, the distinction between utility and hedonic values often blur. So for example, but one insight about it, for example, is that employers try to make the work environment pleasant, because if it's pleasant for people, then they can drive out of the employees the utility. Same thing about sellers. Why would sellers make the shopping experience pleasant? Is because if it is pleasant for us, this is the hedonic value, they can try to squeeze out of us the utility. Okay? So let's talk about entertainment markets. Before the machine age, that is before machines were introduced, which was late 19th century, we had entertainment. It was live performances only. Okay? Now, we had small retailers, or we can call them retailers, which would be theaters, concert halls, and public facilities. The market were extremely underdeveloped, so you couldn't really transact with them. So in most countries, if not all, entertainment was not public activity, but rather very often it was subsidized by the state or aristocracy or kings, etc. So the market mechanisms were not good enough. Machines allowed commercialization and allowed market to develop. And one thing that machine allowed is create copies of entertainment products, something that we did not have before. The only thing we had before was books, which some people still consider entertainment, but it's not a social activity because it's independent. What machines allowed us to do is to create massive supply and distribution chains, something that we did not have before. Okay, so this is relatively a new phenomenon, that we have supply chains or that we have distribution chains. This allowed, or this led to the increase of market power and accumulation of wealth. Now, income inequality and wealth inequality were a common phenomenon throughout human history, but that was before markets existed. The belief was that market would be equalizers, or democracies would be equalizers, but what we have seen historically is that market mechanisms actually just change who are the wealthy class. So so the wealth is moved from one class to another, and every disruptors become the new economic elite. So that's some kind of a disappointment with which I think all countries still struggle. People see inequality and said we should fix that. In reality, there was a blip in the second half of the 20th century that inequality was not so significant, but it's very difficult to address it economically. And the last component is that we have seen specialized large-scale retailers, such as department stores and movie theaters. Okay? Now, one thing that machines allowed us is to have home technologies. And the home technologies is a substitute to watching things in retailer, okay? But there were two things about home technologies until the recent era. One is that the sellers had limited control. That is, if you had a DVD, you could give it to your friends or you copy it. If you had an album, etc. So that kind of limit the value that you can extract from the work. And the other thing is that the quality gap between home and retail entertainment was vast. And one of the differences was the lack of shared consumption. If you watch a movie at home, at best you watch it with your friends, your family. It's more difficult than going out. And so that's one thing that we did not have so well. Digital technologies have changed all that. We have low-cost distribution. Distribution is more or less zero. High-quality product. We have control over products. Rather than IP rights, now it's contractual and technological, so you can extract the value. And we have embedded network effects, because this is the essence of these technologies, is that these are network technologies. The network effect, and the significance, and it's important to understand that, is that scale and concentration are inevitable and inescapable. The only question is, how do we address it, or how do we mitigate the social cost of concentration? This is inevitable. Any other feelings is not realistic. Okay? So the last impediment is, what about shared consumption? Could we really move from being in a physical space to have to consume things virtually and virtual collaborations? This conference suggests that at least that you could do it pretty not so bad, okay? And I've learned from my son. I told my son about this talk, and he told me, my son is 6th grader, he told me that on Friday night, he has a movie night with friends. So the way they're going to have the movie night is that they're going to watch a movie, one of them is going to stream the movie, and they're going to be on live conference call. Now, for me, it looks weird. For my sons, it looked natural. And that's one of the elements what we see in terms of friction, that for those of us who are 30 years and older, For us, we grew up whereas for us, interactions were in a physical space. It's difficult for us to think about moving the space, but what we see is that it just happened. COVID forced us to learn that. Okay, so a few projections. One thing, all market arrangements are going to be more flexible. Okay, more flexible means that it will be more difficult to define market and to define project or define arrangements. So, for example, think about content products. We grew up with movies or TV shows. Now, the variety, universe of content or your content product is vast. How do you compare them? Is each one of them a separate market? How to tell? Labor arrangements are going to be very different. It used to be that you had a job, you had the office, you had to go there. Today, we're going to have a much more flexible and fluid working arrangement. Some of us will return. Most of us will be in a physical space in a much more limited fashion, and some of us will never get to the office. This means that we're going to relax constraints on how we interact with each other. So that is, we used to have some constraints because to work together, we had to be in the physical space. And products were product. One thing, so what you're going to see is that things will be more fluid. The product dimension, the transaction dimension, everything will be more fluid. And the last thing, which is quite interesting, is that shared spaces mean simultaneous utilization of assets. This is going to be on decline. On the other hand, what we are going to see on the rise is sequential utilization of assets. And this is the sharing economy. So for example, Airbnb is going public this week, and that's example for sequential utilization. You have an asset, you have an efficient mechanism of who is using it when. Same thing with WeWork, same thing with Uber or Lyft or any other sharing economy institutions that you have in Brazil. And the last thing, which is obvious, is that we're going to see massive pressure to strengthen antitrust enforcement, not necessarily for good reasons. The two major claims that we are going to see will be that they will portray the losses caused by disruption, that is brick-and-mortar or other traditional industries, described as anti-competitive outcomes of anti-competitive conduct. And the newcomers, the new networks or digital platforms their success will be depicted as evidence of monopolistic practices. Now, it doesn't mean that they do not engage in anti-competitive practices. It doesn't mean that we don't have problems, but these are not evidence as far as competition policy concerns. So let me wrap it up, a few antitrust implications. Number one, the traditional antitrust analysis is highly structured and it doesn't fit flexible market arrangement of the kind we are seeing now. Second thing, present enforcement institutions don't fit well global markets. And just before we started, we had a short conversation. If we want to address the digital platform, Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc., it will not be one country. There must be some kind of international cooperation. Unfortunately, we don't have that, and the political climate in most countries is not favorable to that. The next thing is indeed powerful digital platforms. They dominate the economy. It will be wrong to think that could be changed. Okay? Well, they're just going to grow more powerful. The next one is many lost legal standards are about human decision-making. So for many elements of law, regardless of jurisdiction, we have intent or we have agreement. How we are going to analyze it when decisions will be made by algorithms and artificial intelligence? The legal system is not compatible with that. What will be the intellectual property regimes when we're talking about algorithms or when we're talking about creation of algorithms? Our legal system is just not compatible with present technologies. The next thing is that competition policy or antitrust, we have focused traditionally about the word competition. The change we're going to see is that rather than talk about competition, we're going to talk about the competitive process. And the reason is because we're going to see fewer and fewer, we're going to see concentration. So the question is whether this concentration creates impediment to transition. So that's something that will inevitably happen. And the last thing, which I think Lenisa will talk more about it, is that we'll have to have more standards for competitive harm. It couldn't be only low prices because most products today don't pay for them. So we'll have to think about a few other dimensions. What are we losing if certain things are done in one way or another? So for example, Brazil. Brazil is a country that is enormously wealthy with cultural assets and natural assets. it is less wealthy in terms of monetary assets. But do Brazilians want to sacrifice the wealth they have to substitute it with a different type of wealth? I suppose that some do, but many probably would say that you should think about the trade-offs. So that's what I had to say about antitrust. The last thing, just to be somewhat positive or not, I just want to share a last insight about the motion picture industry, which can be said, it could be called the rise of horror, something like you can think about 2020. So I talked about the decline of box office revenues, but one thing that people always, not many people are aware of, is that the rise of box office revenues of horror films. So in 2020, it's close to 13%. That is more than 1 out of 10 tickets are bought by people who like horror movies. Why does it happen? Your explanation is as good as mine. One explanation could be that people who go to horror movies don't care about COVID. They say the world is anyway ending. I should just expedite it. Or there could be any other explanation. So I'll close with that. It was a pleasure. I look forward to the conversation. You could reach me via email or could see my work on my personal website. Lenisa?
Thank you, Professor. I will just one or two brief comments. Congratulations, Professor Barak. It was very interesting, and I got curious to see. I mean, the open demonstrations for each type of movie. You know, to see the curves. Why people start to see more this than that, and etc. But let's hear the presentation prepared by Lenisa, and then we can open to debates. Here, Professor Vinicius, and start the debate. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. Let me start by saying that I'm truly honored to be here today, especially in this event, which indicates clearly the exceptional quality of the work performed by this amazing think tank that is IBCI. I thank Mr. Eduardo Gaban for the invitation and Mr. Barak Orbach for the previous talk, when I was graced by your geniality and generosity. I'm also very grateful for the opportunity to hear Mr. Vinicius Klein's lessons and for being able to know, although virtually, each of the components on this panel. As a disclaimer, I have to register that the opinions that I will share with you are very personal and not necessarily reflect the institution of which I belong, that is CADE. So I'm starting to, first, we have to go by introduction, right? So the first thing that calls my attention in this market, it's dynamics. And Mr. Orbach explained that graphically and in a very interesting way. A lot of things changed and some things did not change at all. In the last 100 years, people go to the cinema looking for an audiovisual experience, which can be entertainment or cultural, or both. And at the same time, they are also looking for a social experience. Watching a film at home or at the cinema are different experiences, a little like watch a football match at the stadium or at home in our couch. The social experience hasn't changed in the last many years. But you see, my son, before the COVID pandemic, used to go to the movies like most of us did when we were his age. I feel that maybe I have a different perspective of Professor Barak on this subject. However, I couldn't agree more on the fact that shared consumption is a strong tendency. Watching a TV show and share comments with your friends or in social network is a different experience as he's shown. At the same time, some things did not change as the social experience of going to the movies. Other changed a lot. First, we had television. Then we had the color television. Then came the home video with several technologies. And now we are experiencing the maturity of a new way of distributing content that is the streaming. I will not deeply analyze the timeline shown, but I would like to stress that in a competition perspective, things were not that peaceful in the past. The format wars between VHS and Betamax were intense. One had better quality and the other had better price, but several parts of the market were involved in, from the manufacturers to the studios which distributed the movies. There was a second format wars on Blu-ray versus HD DVD. This war was not long sanguine, since people and the market recognized that their formats would not long last. Probably nobody in the audience bought a HD DVD movie, unless we consider the Xbox games. That is very important also. Now we are about to face the first round of streaming wars, in which there is a fight against piracy. But there is also a fight between entertainment companies and a new perspective on the consumer's right of access to the content in both the cultural and entertaining sense. Well, as we know, Brazil is a very complex country. It is a continental country, culturally diverse, and with a huge social gap between the social classes. That said, with 200 million inhabitants, Brazil is not a small market. Thus, we have a domestic market of a reasonable size for audiovisual products. Our market does not have deep pockets as other countries, but we do consume a lot of audiovisual works. For example, consider the amount of hours spent by Brazilians in YouTube. We are the second biggest viewers. We are behind only United States. As a Portuguese-speaking country, besides Portugal and a few African countries and Asian territories, we need translation or subtitles for the foreign products to be accessible to most of the population. On the other hand, it is difficult to export Brazilian content to other countries. If we take England, for example, we will notice that audiovisual content is an important product for exportation. Like Downton Abbey, as an example, everyone watches it. Although I have to make a little comment here, we are very proud to be the greatest exporting country of novellas. That are the soap operas. So that's a very important. We have to make that registration here. So we are a very plural country with several cultural influences coexisting in Brazil. It is not an easy task to bring this diversity to the movies and to the audiovisual content. Brazilians, for several reasons, fell in love with television. Brazilian Statistics Department, that is IBCI, in their research showed that we have more houses with TV than with refrigerators. That says a lot. That's an impressive number. We had a market leader in broadcasting that is now being challenged by the new ways of distributing and consuming news and content. Well, talking about movies and competitions, we cannot ignore the problems regarding piracy. Piracy is a serious problem in the audiovisual market. When negotiations of the Rome Treaty started after the Second World War, sino-piracy was already a problem in radio transmissions and later in broadcasting. Copyrights infringements date more than 2 centuries. It's a very long war. On a competitive perspective, you would have a problem when you have someone profiting from someone else's property without any kind of compensation. The pirate has no costs of development of a content and its production and marketing. So the piracy clearly has a competitive advantage which was obtained unfairly. Moreover, the pirates damages the competition within the market legally established. producers, distributors, movie theaters, cable TV channels, lose audience, lose sales, lose advertisers, and so on. It's pretty bad for business as a whole, not to mention that piracy does not improve public revenue. We cannot ignore that new technologies have been good for business in several ways, but they also made it easier for a new generation of pirates to emerge. In a dynamic world, old tools may not work. However, it is also necessary to understand the complexity of this matter. In Brazil, we do have a social distortion that has several effects in the market. As a gray market, it is difficult to have credible numbers, but it's not difficult to imagine that in a country where minimum wage is about $200, not many people can pay 20, 30 reais for a movie ticket. That's something around $6, or around 100 reais, that is approximately $20 if we consider a family. The fuss about a movie talks louder than people's income. Piracy become a way of accessing the content. We've had a case in Brazil involving the movie Tropa de Elite, was distributed worldwide, known as Elite Squad, and one of the post-production's copies leaked and got into content pirates' hand. All of a sudden, there were pirate DVDs copies being distributed all around Brazil. The movie did very well at the box office, and Tropa de Elite Part 2 became the biggest cinema audience in Brazil when it was released. It is difficult to analyze this phenomenon without proper numbers, but it seems that piracy, in a certain way, helped on creating a fuss about the movie and establishing a strong brand. Furthermore, there is the problem of audiovisual works which are kept in the vault of its owners. We can see problems also in the book markets. To access this content, people use black channels through the internet. There is a lot of work and developments that should occur in this subject so that we have a proper balance on the rights of market actors, public and consumer perspective, and even on a competition point of view. Well, at this moment, I would like to focus a little bit on the distribution segment, more specifically on the distribution to movie theaters. I will use the number provided by Ancine, that is our national cinema agency, on its analysis of the 2018 market, which was released in 2019. Sorry, they do not have the numbers for 2019 yet. Analyzing the 2018 numbers, we would notice that the major distributors, 6 American distribution companies, which are strong companies all around the world, have distributed 17 of the Brazilians' top 20 movies. Disney, a very powerful company which recently acquired Fox, released 7 of these titles, including 3 on the top 5. There are only 3 Brazilian titles. The second in this ranking is the story of a neo-Pentecostal bishop who found his own church and owns several televisions and radio stations. The other 2 were numbers 19 and 17. All the 3 were released by the same Brazilian distributor. Avengers, the blockbusters of the blockbusters in 18, was released in 2,381 movie theaters. The Ancine study did not show how many screens, but we are talking about 71% of the Brazilian theaters. We can understand that a blockbuster like that gives Disney a lot of market power while negotiating its rights with cinemas and TVs. Just for the record, the movie theater market in Brazil has a lot of potential to grow, considering that Mexico, which socially resembles Brazil, has twice the Brazilian number of theaters. But I imagine that COVID pandemic will impact that growth of such market, even if mass vaccination occurs, because people will, understandably, be more cautious when deciding to spend hours in a closed environment. And in that point, I believe I'm agreeing with Professor Orbach. In another perspective, we can analyze the market power of major distributors who are the top 5 of Brazilian market. The number from Disney and Fox are apart, and if we get their income together, they are twice of the income of Warner, the second in ranking. The numbers for releases would lead us to the idea that there is a reasonable amount of diversity in Brazilian market. However, when we notice that 77% of the public and 80% of the income is concentrated in major distributors, we might consider that competition is not good in the market and that a group of companies has market power. We stress that this is not necessarily an antitrust issue, but some actions from these distributors can raise doubts, as in virtual print fee, that we will talk about later in this session. Brazil has a complex history with cinema regarding public intervention and liberalization. When there was no public funding to the Brazilian production, it disappeared. Therefore, in 2001, inspired by the Brazilian regulation wave, Ancine was created. Its mission was to coordinate the public funding through direct investments as well as indirect investments, which were made using tax incentives. Part of the income tax of the companies could be invested in production. Ancine had several tools to create a more diverse and competitive market, and in a certain way, it did. As we've seen before, there were 3 Brazilian movies in 2018, top 20. In the 90s, there would probably be no movies at all in that list. Moreover, Brazilian movies were also taking part in international festivals and winning prizes. Brazil introduced a rule called, that's the federal government, introduced a rule called screen quota, which demands that cinemas and cable TV broadcasts a determined amount of national production. This amount is calculated according to the numbers of cinemas rooms. In 2020, companies with the cinema were expected to dedicate at least 27 days to national movies. A movie theater complex that has more than 20 rooms, for example, would have to display at least 24 Brazilian movies. The quotas were important interest too, but after a while, they got redundant since the Brazilian content was able to self-maintain in the market. The digitalization of the movie theaters was an important issue in Brazil, and I believe worldwide. Most of the Brazilian screens were using 35 millimeters projectors, and the costs for switching into a new technology were unbearable to some cinema owners. And there was a risk of closure of smaller cinemas located in smaller cities. The Brazilian market, which was growing slowly, had the risk of shrinking. Therefore, the federal government, together with Ancine and other actors, started to organize ways of making viable the investments on the digital technology and establishing contracts which were considered bearable by the agents involved. And this included the virtual print fees passed by distributors to movie theaters. So Ancine was designed to take care of the audiovisual as a whole. When transformed into law, it was focused on cinema, later on cable TV. But what about Ancine's future in the light of the technological changes and convergence? Well, Ancine will not make sense in the near future if its policies are limited to cinemas and cable TVs. The market is creating new streams and content on a daily basis. So we have to ask, what's the future of the agency? That's a very complicated issue. And as a panelist who's a little bit behind schedule, I'll leave the questions to the audience and move on to the next slide. Okay, at this point, I'd like to briefly present a few cases in the audiovisual sector which were recently analyzed at CADE. I like to stress that I cannot express my opinion on pending cases, so I refer them very superficially, but I believe it is important for academics and law practitioners to debate them and develop different perspectives. Sport broadcasting rights are a big issue in Brazil and in several other countries. In the US, there is an interesting case on antitrust exemption regarding baseball transmissions. In Brazil, the competition problems are mostly connected to football or soccer for the American audience. More specifically to the television rights associated with the Brazilian Championship. Football matches in TV attract a huge audience, predominantly composed by male audience, which is a difficult market to reach through TV advertisements. Therefore, there is a huge market to advertise products direct to men, as well as products in which men are a part of the buying decision, like cars, beers, telecom companies, and we can go on. Football transmissions attract a significant audience and give to its owner a market power on TV transmissions. The way they were sold makes even harder to attempt to equalize the market. It is sold only to one broadcaster for TV, cable, and internet transmission. There was a case which was settled in 2010, and recently in 2020, began a new investigation probe that is being conducted at CADE's investigation unit, the General Superintendency. AT&T acquisition of Time Warner was problematic in Brazil. Time Warner was the second biggest programmer in Brazil and was merged with Sky, the second biggest distributor of cable TV in Brazil, which was a strong player since it used DTH technology, that is satellite transmissions, that could reach all the country, even the smallest cities located near the Amazon, which haven't significant access to cable, TV, or internet. This case was approved by CADE, but there are still discussions going on regulatory agencies. And more recently, we had the acquisition of 21st Century by Fox by Disney. It is a situation in which a content producer and distributor merges with another powerful one. There were issues on the cable TV market, specifically on sports channels, since the two companies had a strong position in its market with ESPN and Fox sports brands. No problems were considered regarding the distribution to movie theaters. The interesting point on this merger is the amount of intellectual property that is owned by remaining firm. We can spend a whole day here mentioning the brands that they own. It's not difficult to foresee that all this massive amount of content will probably be used on streaming devices like Disney+. Other brands can be created, but we have to admit that considering marketing efforts associated to these brands, it will be very hard for competitors to develop brands as stronger as Star Wars, Marvel, Mickey Mouse, and Grey's Anatomy. As I mentioned before, the audiovisual industry is changing rapidly and intensely, in a parallel movement to the dynamics of constant change in the world which we live in. It is possible to think of bright scenarios in which the market will be structured in a competitive way, which will be fantastic for all the companies and consumers involved. However, it is easier at this moment to predict a not so good scenario, especially at this time of global crisis. There is a risk of facing massive market concentration, which would impact on diversity and plurality. An important feature of this market is the diversity of agents producing content, distributing different products for the various kinds of public and screens. And in the end of the day, innovating and competing for the public attention. There is no diversity, and it's bad for consumers, for advertisers, and it's bad for competition and for the society as a whole, which does not have access to plural content that reflect our society. Let me share with you a very personal concern. Like millions of Brazilians, I hire internet and cable TV services from one of the biggest suppliers in Brazil. And recently, while changing channels on TV, I've realized that one channel is a dedicated door to access a specific streaming company, which also is one of the biggest content producer in the world. This shows to me that cable TV will make room to accommodate a predetermined, pre-selected streaming company, leaving others competitors to play only through internet, which this will make this market even more difficult to equalize. So we also have to consider a bright future. And for that, I believe that Baby Yoda is necessary in this presentation since it's an image of hope and cuteness. In this bright future, people will have access to diverse, innovative and quality content on several screens. There will emerge new ways of consuming audiovisual content that we cannot foresee yet. At this point, I like to bring an example to the audience. I have a lovely daughter called Louise, who is 7 years old. How do you believe she will react when I tell her that when I was her age, I only had a couple of TVs in my house with about 4 or 5 channels? That even with those channels, we had to wait for the commercials to be over because there was no way to fast forward them. Explaining to her that there were no smart TVs, no tablets, no iPads, no smartphones, no YouTube was almost as hard as to explain that in order to read a magazine, you do not swipe left, you have to turn the pages. Well, it's not hard to believe that she will face the same problems when having this kind of talk with her daughter. Imagine she explaining that when she was 7 years old, there were only smart TVs, tablets, smartphones, and YouTube. Her daughter will stare at her the same way that she stared at me with that look. Are you serious, Mom? Well, for this dilemma to continue, our society will have to think about competition and innovation in the communication market, also in the technology field, in order to establish effective and more long-lasting legal grounds, preserving a much-needed diversity and plurality. We have to imagine that the principles that are relevant to our society and pursue them. The enforcement of competition through the several authorities worldwide will be necessary when the market fails to provide an adequate environment for our society. Also, in my opinion, the importance of dialogue between the authorities of each country grows every day because we are dealing with a market in which, for example, the American content that is released today, tomorrow already becomes an object of desire for consumption in India. It is not difficult to imagine that we will face intense and important battles in the future. So may the force be with you always. Thank you very much. Let me stop sharing my presentation. Did it stop?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Congratulations, Lenisa. It was a terrific presentation, and I enjoyed very much the last word, may the force be with you, you know. I love it. But let's hear Vinicius' comments, and I made some comments that after Vinicius, I may share with you, and we can use our time to have an enjoyable debate. Vinicius, please.
So thank you very much. I'm very honored and excited to be here in this panel. It's a very important topic, and I wanna thank Lenisa and Barak for wonderful presentations. And I was very excited when Barak said he would be in our conference when I invited him. So it's an honor really to be here talking about this topic. my idea here is to try to discuss two points that could be used to have some connections with both presentations. The first one is this thing about cross ownership. So in Brazil, there is a law about audiovisual content, about cable TV. And that law prohibits cross ownership in the audiovisual value of chain. So if you produce content, you cannot distribute the same content. And that prohibition is historical, makes sense. I think it's like a structural measure, because you don't have then you cannot control all the chain. You can produce, but you cannot control the distribution. And if you think about cinema history through like Barak articles, you can see that MPP and other forms were like this in the beginning. They produced content. They had some control about the theaters. They started to buy theaters. Then they produced like a very big oligopoly. So I would like to think about if this makes any sense nowadays with this technology, and ask both of you. Because in this way, I think you are doing a regulatory imbalance, because the streaming doesn't have this prohibition, and the cable TV has. So it's two different regulations for supposedly two different markets, but I think it's not two different markets. It's two products competing, and if you cannot produce and distribute content in cable TV, why can you do that on streaming? Our Supreme Court, STF, has analyzed that and said that's constitutional. But this is not the big issue. It's constitutional, but it makes sense nowadays. And with this is the first provocation I'd like to ask. This is maybe a thing that doesn't make any sense anymore. And cable TV, movies, and streaming should have the same regulatory regime, have the same measures, the same obligations, the same rights, and things like that. If you have to have like national content on cable TV, you should have national content on streaming. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. That's another question. But I think you have to have the same rules for both markets. And I don't know if you, Lenisa and Barak, agree with that. That's the first provocation.
Vinicius, just a question for the operation of this panel. Are you planning to present all questions, then we open to debate, or you want to a question and answer? Maybe you should go over and then we open. Is that okay?
It can be. For me, it's okay if you can stop here and make the debate, then you go ahead, no problem for me. I'm going to start. I was planning to go through the whole presentation, but if that's better to stop here, you can stop here. No problem for me.
No, go on. Let's do the original plan. Go over the full presentation, then we open. Okay.
Okay. So the second one is the thing about big data, and when I read Barak's article, I was thinking something, because he was one of the first articles I read that said that had a more bright and more optimistic view about big data. He was using the data from he was using data from loyalty programs in cinema, in theater, and comparing that with the data from streaming. And usually you see in some discussions the idea that the big techs have all the data, all the intelligence to use that data, all the tools, the technological tools to do that, and the other competitor is in a disadvantage, and that's very hard to overcome. But it was one of the most optimistic papers I read, when he said that maybe the use of big data to make a more pleasant experience in the cinema, maybe offering the right popcorn, offering the right amenities, using more in a more efficient way, the theater would be a way to do a counterattack on big techs. And this is a vision that is not usual for me, and I would like to ask him if you think that's a good counter measure to fight against that, or if it's irreversible. You cannot compete with big data from the big techs, at least. They don't have a way to overcome that. And the thing about structure also is that Netflix, for instance, is an example, initiated the business just as a distributor, then it started to produce content. And this was a measure that was needed in that time, because the studios were not saying more and allowing more these movies to be passed on Netflix and want to produce their own streaming service. But I would like to ask how do you think that's going to change? Because Netflix and other streaming service are producers and distributors. And if that's like this, why, for instance, Netflix does not start buying theaters and start competing in that way too? Because it can be the same thing as I think Disney, for instance. He can have produce it and distribute in several vehicles the content. And the last thing is about the rate of patients and impatience. When I studied economics in my PhD, I remember a lot of economic models about patience and impatience. And that was very important. The price discrimination used patient and impatience. So in the cultural market, if you have the release of a book or a movie or a CD, then you buy first to pay more. If you can wait for more months or more time, you can buy for less. Do you think that is lost in this new way of streaming and things like that, because you don't pay anymore for waiting sometimes? And to do that, I had done a very quick survey, because there is in these last 2 days, there is a group here in Brazil in a university called NOMA, and I would like to thank them. They a group about law and arts, and I asked them, and they are students from the university, so they are young, like they are studying law, and they like art. So if they prefer to watch movies at cinema or streaming, it's just 23 answers, so it's not so much, it's not statistically important, but just to illustrate the argument. And 60% said they prefer streaming. So it's interesting, because they like art, but they accept that they see that on streaming. And usually they have more than one streaming service. It's true. They have someone that has 3, who has just one is the last part of them. And the other question is, when do the movie release, what do you like to do? So pay any value the cinema, 26%. Sign the platform, 87%. Expect the movie to be launched in the streaming platform, 30%. And 34% is the most of them would pay an amount to see the movie. That is interesting, because they like to go to the movies, but they don't care so much about seeing on streaming. They like the movies, but they also like streaming. And they like all of them, but they are all people that like arts. They have like the art. They would like to go to the movies. So in this way, I would like to ask something, because we have some people that have more than one streaming service, and 2 or 3 now, these young people. And I have Professor Barak, Professor Lenisa had talked about shared content, shared experience. I'd like to ask if you have like several streaming servers, like 10 streaming servers, 15. Do you have shared values? Because culture is important also to shared values. Or it's going to enhance that think about a social network, that you have just your bubble and you just talk with people that think like you and have the same streaming as you sign, and then don't have like the American captain during the war to have a shared value for United States or something like that in Brazil. So thank you very much for the time. And it's over, Eduardo. Thank you very much.
It's not over. It's not over. It's just beginning.
No, yeah.
Now the debate. So thank you very much, Vinicius. As always, very clever and I would say insightful comments. So I think let me just aggregate some ideas following your comments, Vinicius. Then we can hear Professor Barak and Professor Lenisa what they think. I just want to share with you personal/professional experience related to some cases that Lenisa brought to the audience, and which will create a platform for me to construct my ideas. So I represented parties in this case involving the exclusivity over soccer games. So, and I mean, almost in all these cases, I was there representing one or another party, you know. So the plaintiff in the Sport TV case, association against exclusivity, and the challenging party against the merger Sky and DirecTV, the plaintiff against the exclusivity over the rights to cover and then broadcast the Clube dos 13, and AT&T Time Warner. I represented parties in the US against the merger, but something that I mean, I'm quite persuaded that bringing from the past the idea of Schumpeter, we have a clear disruption in this market. So the disruption in technology is clear and led to a radical change in the competition environment. So that's pretty much what Vinicius mentioned. So the cross-ownership prohibition, so forth and so on, it doesn't matter at all. Nowadays, it sounds like a regulatory hurdle, much more than something pro-society. So it's all changed. We have voice over IP, we have all in streaming. We are now doing this because we don't have like the obstacles, like essential facility properties that we discussed in these cases like 10 or more years ago, right? So it's really difficult. And we have, to my knowledge, we have like this move that Professor Barak caught very well from the brick-and-mortar commerce to the online commerce. I mean, led to at least two phenomena and one dilemma, if I may, to give the word again to you. The first phenomenon is we have a clear economic dependence of everybody from the digital ecosystems, right? So who does not depend? Everyone who intends to commercialize something depends at some extent to a digital ecosystem, so platforms, right? So this is something different in comparison to the past. And the second phenomenon, if we depend on them, we should be able to reshape the products and services and to know how to add value, because this happened to the music industry, right? When we had the discs and then the CDs, and now we don't have it. For ages, we don't have it. Nobody buys CDs anymore. So it was reshaped, the value, and shaped within the ecosystem. So more dependence. And the dilemma is basically that we have a huge leverage capacity within the ecosystems. That's why we're doing now. We are speaking using a software like an app, and then we are leveraging, use another one, YouTube, to uncountable watchers. You know, we cannot say now because it's going to be there tomorrow, and then the leverage capacity is huge. You cannot measure. But there should be other ways to attribute value, right? So how can you help us, Professor Barak and Lenisa?
Let me make a few comments. One thing that's a general theme that each one of us has talked about is we grew up in a generation where we celebrated disruption. And the way we have learned it at school, and the beginning of our professional career, we started learning about it, is that there are innovators, Schumpeterian innovators, they disrupt, some companies go out of the market and the world becomes a better place. Now, when we learned it, unfortunately, it was too theoretical. When Schumpeter wrote about it, it was already theoretical back then. Schumpeter looked at the turn of the 19th century when he was a kid, and that was not his experience. What we do know now from our personal experience is that changes do not happen overnight and do not happen evenly, but rather they create some kind of a technological divide. The closer you are to technological change, the wealthier you are, and the further you are, the more difficult it for you is to get things. So some of the things that all of us talked about are that where you are in society defines what kind of technology you watch. So, for example, the more affluent you are, it is easier for you to consume it at home. The younger you are, it is easier for you to consume it at home. So Lenisa talked about her kids, the way they consume it, which is so different than the way we have done that. And one thing that as society we will have to address is to try to close the digital gap and because this will move society up. But just saying that, oh, we have this technology, disruptions are great, that's not going to be good. So in Brazil, when we have deep pockets of poverty, people watch it on TV, people still watch it in community centers, whether it would be church or something like that. And not enough people watch it on the internet, or the internet is not high-speed internet. So this is something that antitrust is not the right instrument, but we will have to figure out ways to address that. That's point number one. Point number two, and I think it's important to address, I was actually surprised that Lenisa talked about IP. This is something that we talked about when we were students in the 20th century. The motion picture industry is still obsessed with that, and this is why it's going down. Today, IP is almost not an issue in content. Rather, the issue is distribution. The control is in the distribution. And if you're really concerned about IP, there's no evidence that IP harm producers. Actually, Lenisa mentioned that in certain movies, piracy helps create demands. So we are in a new regime, and the regime is about access. Do you have access or not? And again, each one of us talked about a different dimension of access, but all these dimensions are correct, and all these dimensions are important, and we don't have solution. So Vinicius talked about ownership or stuff like that. Well, the real problem is high-speed internet. And that's true for any country in the world. If we want to make the country a better place, if we want to elevate people from poverty, we need to provide them with access to high-speed internet. Content comes with that, okay? So our kids, so Lenisa's daughter is younger. My son is between the ages of Lenisa's daughters and son. They are, even though there are 10 years difference, that's between her daughter and son, they are different generation in terms of habits. And her son used to go to the theater, as Lenisa said. Her daughter even cannot conceptualize our world. I mean, we are like aliens to her. And I think any parent knows that. So again, in terms of thinking about these problems, there is the issue of power, which is significant, and we will have to address it as society. It's not only Brazil or the United States, but rather we'll have to figure out globally. But the most important thing for us to do is to figure out how we expand access to high-speed internet, which, back to Vinicius' point, this will be an issue of property. How do you have how much you're going to have a government element in that? But everything we do now is about access to high-speed internet.
Yeah. I agree with Professor Orbach. And I have to say, Vinicius, that you reached a point of a very interesting debate, because we know that federal law, I wrote it down, 12485 tried to resolve this problem derived from sharing properties, cross property. And it's not easy. And it's not easy, as it was proven when the AT&T and Warner case was submitted to CADE. Mr. Gaban is a personal, he was there in person. He was a lawyer in this case, and he can give his collaboration. But I mean, we have difficulties that probably we cannot solve. But as Eduardo and Mr. Barak said, the revolution of technology is moving us from the huge black discs that we use to listen to music to Spotify, then from radio to streaming. And as Mr. Barak said, the connecting dot is the internet. Yeah. So in order to establish, for example, a market definition in this new era of audiovisual content and entertainment and cultural aspects, I think we will have to stay grounded to the idea of internet. That is not an easy task. As I'm saying, we know that tax law is ancient, is very much older than the antitrust law. And no country in the world can resolve the problem of how to tax the GAFAM, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and so on. And if we cannot control, or at least be aware of the content that goes through the internet, how can we define a market? And how can we identify a player that is using its market share to cause harm to other competitors? It is very, very difficult. In Brazil, we have different experiences from around the world, because we are a country that has continental size. So the daily the experience from a person living in a small city near the Amazon forest is very different from the person who's living in São Paulo capital. And we, as people who think about the laws, I think very hard to do something that will attend all the demands in an equal size and equal measure. So I think Brazilian federal government gave a huge step forward when adding the law to secure data on internet, LGPD, right? Lei Geral de Proteção de Dados. That is a huge step forward, but we are not yet concerned about the antitrust issues, and that makes my head spin every day, because as we say, like Vinicius showed us a survey that analyzed that even the post-teen, let me say, the young adults that are in school, they have three types of streaming, like three suppliers for streaming. But if that streaming has a dedicated door on the cable TV, does it gain competition with using a faulty tool? I think so. But how can we restrain that? Because there is so much we can do as a government, right? We cannot pick and choose what battles we are going to judge. So I think that we have a lot of difficulties ahead, but also we have to come back to the basics. We have to see the results as it results, not because we have to forget like definition markets like 20% or not, because that doesn't make any sense anymore. Not only this market, but in different markets as well. In my opinion, and let me emphasize, in my opinion, we have to take different approaches to really analyze a market. And that audiovisual is the number one, because it's clearly demanding new approaches. That's my opinion.
Well, I'm really glad to hear your opinion, Lenisa, because Professor Orbach was surgical. I mean, we should look at the access, and we can still think of antitrust to deal with access or with types of access in terms of discrimination, but maybe actually we're likely to agree that we will be never able to use the traditional antitrust tool to deal with that. So we can prepare like norms, legal provisions, or programming plus legal provisions. By the way, Vinicius and I, we are writing a paper, very, ambitious paper, I would say. It's a kind sort of a proposition of a new legal discourse combining programming and legal provisions to make an effective regulation, I would say, for ecosystems, and mainly AI algorithms to avoid unlawful practices. Because we do believe the traditional legal matrix is not capable of doing so. The professor, please.
Let me just add to that. So first of all, I think that all probably agree with that. And the people who don't agree with that normally just because they have clients that it's not comfortable for them. The general structure of law, regardless of jurisdiction, is lawyers are like definitions and like distinctions, etc. That's the essence of law. And in a world that is, the markets are very fluid, and as I describe it, because we have fewer restriction of how we do things, definitions and distinctions don't work very well. So the example, for example, Lenisa mentioned is, how could you define market when things are so fluid? We do need a different approach. And I think I would like to believe that all agree about that. It's just, oddly enough, we don't have strong disagreements because we don't even have propositions of how to address that. So we are not in a position even to argue about that. But one thing that I think is important to understand about how, when we think about how we will move forward, is that there are several things in the market that have fundamentally changed. In the past, we were talking about price, quality. When we thought about how we choose product, we were under the illusion that we make choices, that we compare things. Now, of course, it was never true. We were always influenced by advertising, but we still had this perception. Where we are now today with AI, all these big digital companies, when they use AIs, they affect our preferences and choices in ways that we are unaware of them. And that's something that had to be addressed in some significant fashion, because if we have some entities, whether they do it by their managers or this will be just algorithm optimization that affect our preferences, everything we do is defined by some kind of a narrow optimization function, which will affect how we do things, definitely affect markets, and will have huge negative impact on democratic institutions. And I happen to believe that capitalism and democracy are interrelated. So I would think that number one is start thinking about how AI affects preferences and choices. And so this is something, one element of our thinking when we move forward, whether in antitrust or any other regime.
Well, I think Ms. Eduardo.
Anybody, go on, please.
No, I think Mr. Baraki is right on the subject, because we do not disagree because we don't have propositions. That's very true. But let me say something. I was thinking that what if in a utopic or very distant galaxy far away, we moved the Ancini regulation and the law that demands that movie theaters should display a certain proportion of national productions, okay? Let's move that to the streaming reality. Okay, Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus. You want to establish yourself in the Brazilian domain, but you should, or you should have to include in your catalog at least 2% of Brazilian productions. Okay, that's a great idea. Let's go to our Congress and write that law. But we have a problem that the tax law knows for a long time. Well, Netflix, it's not located in Brazil. It is located on a cloud in a very different dimension, and it does not necessarily submit itself to regional laws. How can we impose a law if we don't have the tools to enforce that law? For me, that's the number one question for the future, because ideas and suggestions may be very effective, very, very good, but how can we give effect? But well, said that, I have to give one thing for like a food for thought. Let us think about something. How can we say that the dominance of American productions, for instance, is an antitrust issue? Because art, as we know, is something that we value differently. Like in my house, I like some things, my husband likes other things, and we have different, we value differently different things, okay? How can we say that the Brazilian productions have the same quality, or they are the same cultural level, and they have to be distributed by every streaming operator? I don't think so, because it's art. Although I have a very patriotic face, and I love my country, and I'm willing to do everything for it, but how can I say that my daughter, she will be culturally improved if she watches national television? I don't think so. That's a type of assumption that is very good on paper, but it does not work on real life. And as I said, we have to start to rethink our standards of everything, of market, of importance of players, of conducts that presumably we think that are illegal, but due to these dynamic changes in technology and in personal experiences, we value different. I think we cannot, I mean, history is good because it makes us be aware of potential damages in the future. But right now, we have to rethink everything. Nothing is set on stone. So that's my food for thought for you, a proposition. Okay, I'm very open to have critics talk to me, because I think that's how we improve, and I'm willing to listen to what you say.
So thank you very much all for the comments, and I'd like to say something about what we discussed, and I agree with Professor Barak that the main infrastructure is access, is internet, and if you have internet, you can have the access to all of this, and this is a way to improve a country, to do this infrastructure, and it seems like it's important. And the think about how to, for instance, how to do you approve the things about how to value internet, because sometimes that seems that it's like asset that has no limits. It's the only thing in the economy that you can use and it's possible to use, because when you talk about cable TV, you have to think like there is a cable there. When you talk about internet, sometimes you think, no, it's in the air, so the air is for everybody. And but I agree with that. And what I was thinking about the regulatory measures, my idea, and this is just my idea, and it's to take these measures for take out, don't put them on the audiovisual sector, because otherwise you have to. I agree with you that it's impossible or very hard to enforce that thing on the internet. So if you cannot enforce on the internet, on the streaming, I think it's a level playing field if you force on another industry that has some difference. But I don't know. I think it's not. It's besides the market definition. I had a panel in the conference I was moderating. The last one was one panel just about market definition in digital aids. We talked about 2 hours about market definition in digital aids. And there is no big conclusion. There's a lot of propositions and debate, so it's very hard. I agree. But besides the market definition in antitrust, I think if you have, the markets are, I don't know. I don't think these markets are substitutes. I think they're the same market. It's in my perspective. So if they're the same markets, I don't see why different rules. But I know that they have some difference. And
well,
so Vinicio, let me just make a comment. I do believe that Lenisa's daughter is the key to everything, because the way you and I, we are not the same age, but we grew up in the same context. You said market definition. I've not had the honor and privilege to meet Louise, but I think that her perception of products is far more fluid than yours and mine. She sees things very interchangeable. She's comparing them in a way that we don't think about it. So for us, there's movie, there are books, there are other things. For her, this is all one universe, which is something that for us looks lack of logic, but in her mind, there is perfect sense of how she makes her choices. And so this is the market. She is the key, not us. That's one thing. One thing about the regulatory element that Lenisa mentioned, and I come also from a country that has a tiny market compared to Brazil, that also try to protect culture through quotas about how many movies, how many TV shows. I now have less concern about it. Again, I think about Luis. She grew up in Brazil. She has Brazilian parents. She has Brazilian brother. Her classmates are Brazilians. She is Brazilian. So she consumes other type of content. But I don't think that Luis is facing now any shortage of content to Brazil. Probably she has far more content that her mom would like her to have. And so I don't have this concern. But I do agree, and I think that we all agree, actually, we must think about different categories. So why do we need market definition? How do you define domination, market with domination, if you don't have market definition? What is powerful? What is not powerful? How do you, what actually means cartel? If you have, in order to have collusion, you need to be in the same market. So all analytical matters require some framework. Our frameworks are quite outdated. And I think that we do agree with that. And actually, I wouldn't like to be offensive, but I don't think that Lenisa offered any proposition. We all agree. We have to have something new.
Yeah. Mr. Barack, you said something earlier, and it caught my attention that we don't have any saying in our choices right now. We are products of an implementing EI and streaming and everything. Okay, that will affect majorly definition of market share, of dominance, of the list of antitrust issues, because it's easy to justify its dominance, answering that is a result of the public's opinion. And if the consumer chooses, it is obviously a legitimate market concentration. You see, everything is so interconnected that we cannot, what can we do? Can we close the bar and say, okay, let's forget everything, let's go to the basics? No, we cannot do that. And just one more thing. Right now, due to the pandemic, not only Louise and this next generation is getting entertainment from the screen, they are also going to school on the screen. We have doctors on the screen. We now are a product of the screen. And that suggests to me that we have to focus on internet providers in the next years to come. Because the internet providers, they can easily shut down a player because it prefers another one. So how can we do that? How can we be vigilant about it? I don't know.
And we do have the very old disease of access in infrastructure for the broadcast internet, right? I mean, many countries are trying to implement the 5G internet, and we are in the preliminary phase of choosing the technology. I mean, when I mentioned with the federal government, they are preparing to choose the technology, and then we will open up for a public bid, and it will be a reality here in the next few years, I think, right? But we do have a problem in the provider. I'm not sure if in the providers, but in the capacity of the 5G, you know, to be used by citizens or people. But just making a counterpoint, because otherwise this will not be a debate. This is a defense of that there's nothing to be done. But actually, as a matter of counterpoint, I think we do have problems, not only of access, but friend problems within the ecosystems in between them, right? I had an experience, very interesting experience, I must say, a year or 2 years ago in Detroit when they launched the movement called Radical Xchange. Have you heard about it, Barak? The Radical Markets book from the Eric Posner and Glenn Weil. They've written a book called Radical Markets, and then it led to a movement called Radical Xchange, and they held a seminar, very interesting indeed, very different than we are from the legal world are used to. And I was there, and I was in Detroit. My wife gave a lecture, and I was like there as a husband only, and a watcher, and attending this seminar. Very interesting. Many artists, I mean, blockchain community, startup community, I mean, very new stuff. And there was a competition for startups to receive a fund. And guess, and we, the attendees, should vote for the best project. So between the sessions, they presented the projects, the business cases, actually, for the startups. And guess which startup won? A startup that basically sells data. They have a machine, I mean, a very strong algorithm, and that can be used in any smartphone or computer. Then you have you give all the consensus for them to hold your data, to extract your data from ecosystem A and transfer to ecosystem B, and they give money to you. You sell the data, Of course, it's not lawful. There are lots of criticism over it. I believe we should be able to sell data. It's my personal opinion, right? But they are waiting for a regulation, basically. There's no regulation at all, only criticisms, but they have obstacles. And there is a disease because the ecosystems, they artificially create obstacles for this type of thing work. They change the APIs, they create specifications that make it a lot more difficult. And in the end of the day, we have a problem. We do have a problem, you know, of access, of exchanging, of allowing the consumer to make his will or her will true. You know, we do have a problem. What do you think about it?
This is very much related to what Vinicius said. So today, there are two things that we need today. A is data, access to data, big data, which there is very few companies that actually has this control over ecosystem that have the databases. So that's one element. The other element is computing power, that the startup you talked about and other companies we know, their technologies will be outdated within 2 or 3 years in a major way. Once Google and Amazon have access to quantum computing, this startup would be totally obsolete. So the key, what we do have is concentration of power over data, and not even over data, because if you have access to the databases of Google and Amazon, you will not have the technology and the computing power to address it. So yeah, every now and then some startup has the access. So these startups have two paths to the future. One is to vanish and the other is to be acquired by one of the big tech. They do not have independent life. And we do need, as Vinicius said, we do need to think about how we address this ecosystem of data and access to computing power. So you mentioned 5G. But when quantum computing will be accessible, countries will have considerable disadvantage compared to big tech. This decryption will not have any significance. How are you going to address all these kind of all the cryptocurrency? I mean, it will be just very different. So we do have a big problem. We have many big problems, and we just need to start thinking about them. And I think that there are two good things and bad things. The good news is that we have a more global community and more of a discourse. That's a good thing. The bad thing is I think that most countries faced with a political crisis when the political institutions are far, far behind the technology and they are not interested in becoming informed. And I think that that's kind of a problem that most countries, if not all, share.
Mr. Orbach, you remember crypto actives? And I think we have to remember that crypto actives, they were created to be a currency on a video game. So it shows that although we think that cultural and entertainment may be something that we can leave to the second step towards a new future, no, it is on the verge of everything that grows disruptively, you know. So what you're saying about big data, I completely agree. And unfortunately, I have to recognize that Brazil is getting far behind the discussion worldwide about how to manage this data. I know, as I said, that the law to protect data in Brazil is recent and it's a big step forward, but we are becoming the last ones to take it into a more serious debate, you know. And as Vinicius said, infrastructure and big data are so related, but in Brazil, I don't know if the effectiveness of this combo can be seen as a general issue, because, as I said, people who live near the Amazon forest, they don't have access to refrigerators. They're not very concerned about big data. And our democratic system in Brazil is very flawed in that aspect, because we have a Congress that not necessarily represents the demands of all the population. So I think we will have to go with what we can. And I'm sure that the Brazilian antitrust authorities are very concerned and very conscious that we have to do something. Although we cannot break the legal barriers, but we have to do something. We have to be very aware of those topics.
All right, I would propose for each one of you give your final remarks because we are reaching the end of our time in the panel. Starting from myself, thank you. I would thank you very much, each one of you, Barak, Lenisa, and Vinicius. I enjoyed a lot this discussion, and if it depends on my end, I would stay here until late night, open a glass of wine, a bottle, and drink wine with you, and we could keep this discussion on, okay? Thank you very much. I look forward to have another opportunity to speak to you and to debate these wonderful themes. Thank you.
So I'd like to just to thank you for the invitation. I do hope that this is the first conversation among many. It was fun. I think that we share today more than before. I mean, all of us around the world. We have many challenges, and we don't even have we don't have about things to argue about because of the challenges. So I think that the more conversation like that we have, the better, and to be continued. Thank you.
I also would like to thank the invitation, and I'd like to propose to IBCI a new event so we can take on the discussion. And also, I would like to make available for everyone who's watching, who's interested to get a copy of my presentation. I've sent it to the organization of this event, so it's made public. I would like to thank everyone who's watching, and Mr. Orbach, Mr. Vinicius, Mr. Eduardo, for the pleasure to be here. And now Eduardo shown us that unfortunately movie theaters have suffered a significant negative impact of COVID, but I'm sure that the wine industry has grown so much upper. So the next time we will be here with our wines, and probably the discussion will have much more laughs than right now.
Nice idea. Vinicius.
Thank you, everyone. I learned a lot today, and with this pleasant conversation, I learned a lot from Lenisa, from Professor Barak, from Eduardo, who is a partner from some time, and we're probably gonna talk more about that subject. And thanks very much for all of you, and thanks for the audience, for the patience in watching us. Thanks.